All right. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to another interview. I'm the creator of Mystic Rebel Arts, and this is an interview for Mystic Rebel Arts magazine. And our cover model, our speaker extraordinaire, our featured individual is Mary Allison Brown. I love her so much. And so, Mary Allison, I'm actually going to have you go ahead and introduce yourself because I think you can probably do it way better than I can. Just tell me a little bit about you, and then we'll start talking about your business and incorporating play.
Okay, sounds great. I'm Mary Allison Brown, as Lola said, and I'm a mental health therapist and a coach. And my focus of my coaching practice is helping women learn how to break up with stress. So I was sort of a generalist, I think, at first. I was really wanting to focus on self-care, which feels a little fluffy even to me, even though it's essential. People don't, feel like they have time for that. But what I found was that the women that I was working with were just really paralyzed by stress. And actually the data backs that up. So I've kind of made that my focus. And I love sort of helping women figure out how to actually cut ties and break up with stress, and then figure out their own patterns of behavior so they can get out of their own way, so they can actually start making progress toward whatever their big dreams and goals are.
That's awesome. So you said something that I find very important in there. And so some of what I like to focus on in the magazine is something called Mysticpreneur, which is essentially those of us who have entrepreneurial dreams, or we are entrepreneurs and we like to incorporate our craft or spirituality into it. And one of the things that you mentioned that I found really interesting that I think business owners need to realize is starting out as a generalist. Tell me a little bit more about being a generalist and how you ended up getting where you are, because I can totally see how self-care is a treatment for the problem you're talking about, but not necessarily the problem. It's more of a Band-Aid for what you finally got to for your own business. So tell me more about that.
It's actually been a really fascinating journey. So I was working as a therapist and mental health consultant, and primarily with children. And I'm a trauma specialist, so I work with kids typically involved in the foster care system who have really significant early childhood trauma. And I was working with this foster mom who was like foster mom extraordinaire, like from the outside, like had it all together, was just incredible. One of those women that you look at and you say, I don't even know how she does it. So this is the facade that everybody saw, that I saw. And while I was working with her, with one of her children, she actually had a suicide attempt. And I remember just feeling completely blindsided by that. I hadn't expected it. I hadn't seen it coming. And I just had this massive realization that my focus had been on children, but that if the women who are taking care of the children aren't also taking care of themselves, we're not really doing anybody a service. And then I met you, and I sort of shared that with you and was like, I really want to help people learn how to take care of themselves. And that's how it all started. That was 2 years ago. And since that time, I've just tried to teach everything, right? So I've done tons of courses of my own. I've done the Spirit Junkie Masterclass with Gabby Bernstein, the Work Your Light course with Rebecca Campbell, all kinds of courses and education throughout the past 2 years. And so I wanted to teach everybody everything. I wanted to teach emotional freedom technique, which people know as tapping. I wanted to teach Ho'oponopono, which is a forgiveness practice. I wanted to teach everybody everything. And everybody says, oh, you can't just be a mindset coach. That's not a thing that people seek out because they're not looking for mindset coaching. And I would get stuck in that. But I'm a therapist. That's what I know how to do. I understand how the brain works. I want to help people stop self-sabotaging, change their relationship with fear, get out of their own way. And so it was really just this evolution where I actually am working with a coach of my own now, and I had brainstormed a list of ideas for trainings I wanted to do. One of them was called Stress Proof Your Life. And as I'm reading her the ideas I had, she stopped me and she said, wait a minute, did you just say stress proof your life? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you have to do that. People need that. And I was like, oh, all right. And I was kind of reluctant at first because the truth was, of that whole list of ideas, that wouldn't have been the one I picked. And so I was kind of like, okay, but it seemed like in my mind, it was like a 1 hour training. Like there's not that much there. but there's so much there. And so the more that I've started working on it and creating the course to go along with it and doing stress coaching one-on-one with women, there's so much to it. And I realize that I've come full circle where it combines all of those things I've wanted to talk about all along in kind of like a personalized approach. But that stress, people are being crushed by stress. So if you're like, I just want to help you fix your mindset, like they can't think about that. They're like, I can't even handle life, like, so it gives me a great starting place. And once we can start to alleviate some of that pressure that people are feeling, then we can really address all the other things too.
Awesome. So one of the biggest things that you and I worked on when we were working together was you conquering stress, but the way that we actually talked about it was that you weren't really allowing yourself that downtime. So what do you think has been the most important ingredient in allowing yourself that downtime as an entrepreneur and as a coach?
Yeah, it's been really, really important. And I remember talking, to you about that when we were doing coaching together and talking about how, and realizing that I was really filling up my calendar as a form of self-sabotage. Because if my calendar was packed full, I never really had to be great at anything because I was good enough at everything, but I had no space to be great. And what I realized was that I had to take out the things that weren't priorities so that I could grow into the things that were. And the more that I've given myself permission to play and have fun and just follow the fun, the more magic has happened. I was thinking about this, talking about play and the importance of it. And what comes up for me just over and over and over again is that play is the birthplace of inspiration and innovation. So if your calendar is smashed, jam-packed, right, all smushed together, you don't have space for inspiration, which means you're not going to be showing up as the best version of yourself and you're not going to be creating the type of transformational content that you really want to create.
So I think an important distinction here is not necessarily that, because we can still plan. Those people who are planners and calendar builders and stuff like that, yes, we know. I am too now. I feel like it's a really important thing to be as an entrepreneur, but it's actually scheduling the play. And so that was one of the things you started doing. So tell me a little bit about scheduling play, because I think people think that play has to be spontaneous and that's the only way that you can play.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely am a planner. I am a scheduler. I like to know what my week is going to look like. And I learned that if I just left white space in my calendar, that if I just left space to see what I felt like doing or to see what happened, that felt uncomfortable to me. I, first of all, didn't trust that I would spend it and not squander it. And second of all, I also felt like if I had this white space, I felt guilt because it looked, when I looked at my calendar, like I had nothing to do. And what I've really come to value is time to just be. And I know that in order to create, I envision creating steel bars around that space on my calendar, but in order to create that, I had to block it off. So I do, I have it all color coded, and of course I do, right? And I put in, this is what's happening. And so I can really protect that time because I know how valuable it is.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think one of the fun things that you did that I remember you talking about was you didn't just put the bars around it. You actually scheduled things that you had to go to so that there was no, oh, I'll just allow whatever this is that's before and after it to kind of creep in on it. And while I still have the bars are squeezing in. It was like, no, I need to have schedule things that I actually have to attend, whether that's a yoga class or you did a trapeze class, or, you could do a pole class or a meditation class or a pottery class or whatever the case may be, but you made sure that it was something that actually had a time constraint, that you had to get there in time, you had to be there on time, you had to leave on time, so that you knew that you were taking that forced play, so to speak, to the next level until you actually became comfortable with it. Because I think one of the things that play does for us is it reprograms the brain without the ego realizing it.
Yeah.
And that's a really amazing learning technique too. I'm sure that you've learned in, early childhood development and things like that when it comes to teaching kids. The reason we have games that when we teach children is because we actually retain the information when we're having fun with it. And so I think that kind of segues into a lot of people take spirituality extremely serious these days. It's a very, the self-help industry is a billion-dollar, probably getting into the trillion-dollar industry. And people are like, oh, I must journal and I must meditate and I must. And we take the play out of it. So we know that this is a spiritual magazine, a witchy magazine. And how have you actually used spirituality to incorporate more play? And I do want you, because I know you, want you to talk about with your kids as well, because I know there's some really fun things you do there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so I was like that at first. So I was, doing my mental health practice. Then I was like, I'm going to come into the online coaching world. And I very much was like, I'm going to have no rules. But I was actually like, well, wait a minute. What's an online coach supposed to look like? What are they supposed to say? What are they supposed to do? And I created all of these other rules. And so a big piece has been giving myself just permission. Ways that I incorporate. So my favorite way that I incorporate spirituality is I love to use oracle cards. And I love to do a combination, which I think I probably asked you at one point, like, am I allowed to do this? And you were like, there aren't rules. But I love to use the Sacred Creators Oracle and ask it, like, what do I need to support my growth in my business right now? And then also grab the Keepers of the Light Oracle and say, who can I call on to support me? And have those two cards together. And I love how that comes together. My kids actually also love the Keepers of the Light deck. So we are out of this routine right now just because our house is under construction. But what we've done in the past is we would use that deck before bed and we would all pick a keeper of the light that we felt connected to who would like watch over us that night. Like we'd say a little prayer to them. And so it's super fun. It's actually funny because they really have their favorites. And so it's interesting to watch that emerge. So my older daughter, Reese, she always comes back to Bridget. And then my little one, every single time will pick Gaia. So I just think that's really interesting. Like, what's that about? And then they'll like hide the card because they don't want anyone to know. They also actually love using pendulums. They just took them out of my drawer the other day, actually. And Reese was holding up both of them. I have two, and was asking them a question. And I was like, I'm not sure if you can use two at once. I don't know about that. But we love to use those too. What else? Just all the other typical spiritual things. Although honestly, I haven't been as consistent about it since I gave myself permission. I'm very consistent about journaling. That's something that I do consider a spiritual practice. It's a way that I really connect with myself, my higher self, my spirit guides. I'm very consistent about that. Not as consistent about meditating, but I try. But I go to yoga. So all of those things kind of come in as they need to. But I really love just not trying to do it any specific way and just letting it kind of be, just being a part of like natural flow of things.
I think what you said was also really important there, which you said you don't really stick to any one thing. And I think that's important for us to think about. If we played the same board game over and over and over and over and over again, it would eventually lose the fun. You know what I mean? We would be so bored with it. So just allowing these things to come in as needed and relying on them as you want them or as feels good, I think is very valuable. But one of the things that you actually touched on, and I know that you like to journal and that you're a really good journaler. I, on the other hand, journal and I try to keep it very short. And I'm not a great journaler because I find the practice to be a little daunting if it gets too long. So how do you keep your journaling fun? Is there, if you had people who are like, oh, I want to get into journaling, how would you keep it fun and fresh? What would be some of your suggestions?
Well, I kind of always recommend that people start with a gratitude journal because it's easy, and journaling for some reason is daunting for a lot of people. A lot of people feel scared about what might come up, scared about having to be honest with themselves. So if people are feeling overwhelmed about the thought of it, I always recommend starting with a gratitude journal. My guided journal, Align with Joy, that's the focus of it is so positive. It's so meant to be just non-threatening. Like focusing on cultivating joy and gratitude every single day. The prompts are the same every single day, with the exception of one additional question for exploration. But because if the questions are the same, people can get into a rhythm with it and not be like scared that something unexpected will pop up. One of my favorite ways to journal that keeps it really fresh and fun for me is by writing a letter to myself from my higher self. And that always, always helps me cultivate a more compassionate perspective of whatever I'm going through. I remember one time in particular, sort of in the midst of the chaos of my divorce and feeling like my online business wasn't taking off fast enough and things weren't changing fast enough and feeling frustrated by that. And I remember just sitting down and writing this letter to myself that was like, Dear Mary Allison. And it was just like so much more compassionate than I was being with myself, you know, and it allowed me to see like, actually things are shifting and changing and it's okay to slow down and to honor that. And I've already made. So I love to do that. And then I also do a lot of manifestation journaling where I'm sort of envisioning what my life is going to look like in 6 months or a year or 2 years and really just writing that out in great detail. And that's really fun for me because it helps keep me focused on where I'm going. So then I can kind of check like, are my behaviors today the behaviors that I need to actually, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. But are my behaviors today the behaviors that I need to keep me on the path toward where I want to go? If this is what I want to see happening in my life in 3 years, and I love that I feel so free and peaceful and energized, what am I doing today to support that? So I feel like that's a really effective technique too. That's also really fun.
So I think that for those who don't know what you're talking about, I've actually heard this called future casting, which is essentially where you sit down, you project yourself out into the future of where you want to be, what it would look like in your future self, and then you just write it out. My suggestion in this is when I've actually had people come to me for this particular journaling exercise is that you project yourself out to moments when you're happiest, because that's when you're going to feel the best and that's when the most fun's probably going to be happening. So when you're doing it, you ask the question like, what does my future self look like in 6 months? I always just like sit down and I start from a moment in time where I know I'm happy in the future, whether that's sitting in my $3 million house getting ready to go to an event, whether that's, you know, my husband has gotten out of the military and is helping me with my business, whether that is, you know, only, 3 weeks from now and I'm doing something and just what I want it to look like. I'm launching a course and people are coming to me and they're telling me that they just love this course and how great it's going for them and that they love the information they're receiving. And so I agree with you. I think that can be fun and playful because I think it's sometimes we're surprised by the things that come up. I actually had a friend and mentor who did this recently. After I drew a card for her that said, you're not expanding big enough, you're thinking too small. And she's like, I've been thinking huge. I mean, she's got $1 million, she's on her way to $1 million year. And she's like, what are you talking about too small? And when she actually sat down and journaled it out, it turns out that she's supposed to start a publishing company. And she would have never thought about that had she not gotten the trigger and then the future casting that would have allowed her to go in that direction.
Yeah, it's super powerful. Plus, it just feels good, right? Because you're envisioning yourself and really allowing yourself to feel what it feels like when these things you're working toward have manifested in your reality. And that feels really good.
Mm-hmm. So if you had one piece of advice, or it could be more than one piece of advice, but just let's maybe start with one because then that probably narrows it down a little bit easier for you, is if you had to give yourself a piece of advice about playing more in your business from the beginning, what would you say?
About playing more. I think I would just tell myself to play more. But I also think what I would say is avoid golden ticket syndrome. So as I'm working with women around stress, this is something that's coming up a lot for me, but particularly in regard to entrepreneurs. So we start an online business and we have learning curves on every front. And we're doing everything by ourselves in the beginning. And we're taking every course and we're learning every website system and every email provider because we're trying to find that one thing that's going to be the golden ticket that's going to make the big difference. And as I look back over the past 2 years, I feel like I've wasted a lot of my time and my mental energy and my emotional resources on trying to find a golden ticket that never existed. So there is no golden ticket. But if I had not been so focused on that, on finding the ticket externally, and I had spent more time allowing myself to just be and to play and to find inspiration, I would have realized, I think, much sooner that I had all the answers I needed already inside of me. And I think that's true for every one of us. So I think that's what it would be not to get so caught up in that golden ticket syndrome and seeking the magic golden ticket outside of ourselves because we already have it inside.
I think you tapped into something there, and that was part of the golden ticket syndrome, I think, is a way that we personally self-sabotage ourselves because we have no idea what we're doing and we're terrified of what it could mean when we have to do all of this on our own. Part of being terrified of success, when you hear that, people say that, you're like, hell no, I'm not scared of success. I would love to make 6 figures. But what you're really afraid of is all of the stuff that comes along with success. And that's the responsibility of helping people create this change. That's the responsibility of, if something goes wrong, you're the one to blame. That's the responsibility of leading a team and what that looks like, as, you know, having to step in as a leader and understanding those things. And so you kind of tapped into a little bit of, when you allow yourself to follow the fun, you not only increase your vibration, and people can feel that and they're drawn to that, which is actually the golden ticket. When people are feel your excitement about something, they want to be excited too, and they're drawn to it. But you also tapped into not doing things the way everybody else is doing them. By taking all of these courses, you were trying to figure out the way that everybody else was doing it. And one of the things you said was, I had to give myself permission to just be. So talk a little bit more about being able to do things outside of what everybody else is doing. Like you had mentioned before we started this interview, some changes that you're making, that are kind of probably not typical of what you hear in advertising for entrepreneurs. You typically hear things like, quit your 9 to 5, say goodbye to the corporate world, pay off your house in 6 months. Now you're making 10K months in a year, and you're on your way to your $1 million year. And that's what everybody thinks they have to get to. And that's what we do. We compare ourselves to. So tell me a little bit about doing things outside of the box.
Yeah, and so we do that, right? And we put all of this pressure on ourselves. But it's so liberating to realize that the pressure is coming from ourselves, and that at any point in time, we can just choose to take the pressure off. It sounds so simple, right? But it really is just a decision to say, oh, it doesn't have to look like that. Like, I don't have to have that type of a sales page or whatever it is. I don't have to have a funnel if I don't want to have a funnel. And so in my business, I do work as a mental health therapist and consultant, as well as with my online coaching practice. And I was feeling really boxed in with my practice. And so I made a decision I didn't expect to make, because one of my sort of big goals is location independence. I don't want to be tied to an office. I want to be able to be doing my work from wherever I happen to be in the world. And so I didn't really expect this, but on a whim applied to do some mental health therapy in an office. And that's a shift, because what I do now is home-based. And so it felt immediately right. It felt freeing. It felt like liberating. It just felt like, oh my gosh, if I do this, I'm going to create more time freedom, not 100% time freedom, but more. It's an incremental upgrade toward where I want to go, because I'll have a full day every week to focus on creating the kind of content that I want without feeling rushed, because I want to pour my heart and soul into it. And the things that I'm working on are really exciting to me, and they're really transformational. So I want to give them the time and energy and attention that they deserve.
So those who are thinking about starting a business, getting into spirituality, beginning any of those two things, what would be your final thoughts and your advice to them on getting started? Whether they're going to be starting in spirituality and then combining it with business, or they're going to keep the two separate, what would be your advice? Which parts of those do you think is the most important?
I think the most important is to create and cultivate quiet in your life, time that you can connect with your own inner wisdom and your own soul. Because no matter what you're trying to do, you already know the answers. You already have them inside of you. And it's when we get so caught up in like the golden ticket syndrome, or trying to be what we think a coach is supposed to look like, or what we think a spiritual person is supposed to look like, that we box ourselves in, and that doesn't serve us. So I would really say, whatever it is, whether it's yoga, running, walking, meditation, like whatever that looks like for you, create that time that you can be alone with yourself. And that is how you will find your path.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today. And you guys can actually find part of this interview and her beautiful photos in the magazine that's coming out around April 15th. Mary Allison, where can they find you if they want to learn how to stress-proof their life, if they want to learn about, playful techniques that you're probably going to teach them within your course and things?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is just my name, maryallisonbrown.com. And Instagram's probably the best place. It's at Mary Allison Brown. And then there's a Facebook group, Stress Ninjas, that you are welcome to join us in, where we're doing some challenges around stress proofing and all of those places.
All right. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye, you guys. Thanks for showing up and watching this video. Blessed be.